Excellent. I think we have a number of people who have already joined, so we can begin now. For those joining in a few moments, they will participate once they get here. So first and foremost, I'd like to thank everyone who's joining us this morning or afternoon, depending upon your geography. My name is Joseph Bajoka. I work for the UK Department for International Trade. I'm based here in the States, and I'd like to welcome everyone to today's webinar, which is focused on the future of clinical research in the UK. We're very much looking forward to an exciting session. This will be both informative and provide an opportunity for our participants to ask very targeted Q&A. If you do want to ask questions, please use the Q&A option within Zoom and list your questions there. As we go through today's program, we will discuss a variety of topics by a variety of my colleagues from across the pond. And at the end of our presentation portion of today's webinar, we will have time for Q&A. So let's hop right into today's agenda. Once again, we're very excited to have everyone here. It should be hopefully a very rigorous and useful discussion. We'll first start with my colleague Theo Christie from the National Institute for Health Research. And Theo is going to really spend time highlighting the levels of free support that are available to companies who are interested in planning, placing, performing, and ultimately monitoring a clinical trial within the UK. We'll then turn things over to Dr. Janet Messer from the Health Research Authority, or the HRA, who's going to discuss the new combined review service, which helps facilitate faster regulatory approvals. We'll then turn things over to Dr. Jacoline Bouvy from NICE, and Dr. Bouvy will very much focus on the scientific advisory services that are available to support market access. We'll then turn things over to Claire Bloomfield from the NHSX, and Claire will focus on discussing data-enabled clinical research in the UK. And then finally, we're going to turn things over to Peter Jelfs, our Global Head of Tax for the Department of International Trade. And Peter will focus on just highlighting some of the financial incentives that are available for companies who are keen on delivering clinical research within the UK. Next slide, please. I'd like to now turn things over to my colleague Theo Christie from the NIHR to begin today's webinar. Theo?
Thank you very much, Joseph, and welcome everyone. Pleasure to have you all join us. I'm very excited to be part of the UK contingent addressing you all this morning. I hope you'll stay with us for the hour and contribute with some questions. We'd be delighted to answer. So, as Joseph mentioned, we've got a number of different stakeholders from the UK presenting. My name is Theo Christie. I am one of the business development managers from within the National Institute for Health Research, specifically the Clinical Research Network. And whilst this session this morning is going to be very much centered around the UK as a whole, I will talk specifically about the Clinical Research Network and the National Institute for Health Research. But before I kind of dive right into that, I just wanted to provide a little bit of context and background regarding the UK's research landscape, which is very much fully embedded across the whole of health and social care spectrum. And really, this has all been made possible through a really strong government commitment in a number of different ways, including financially, to support research and the life sciences industry as a whole. And as you can see there in the infographic on the right, there have been a number of different guidance documents and publications that have been written and issued over the years to really set about a framework and a vision for which the UK can be a leading part of the global clinical research landscape. And I suppose specifically in recent years, we've seen the NHS long-term plan, and early this year, actually, the future of UK clinical research delivery, which really took learnings from, well, off the back of Brexit, and also especially learnings from COVID in terms of the next golden era for the UK in terms of delivering clinical research. And a key part of this vision and this framework is the National Institute for Health Research. And we're very much part of the government strategy to deliver on a number of these areas. This infrastructure just shows a breakdown of the some of the infrastructure that the NIHR, the National Institute for Health Research, fund. And as you can see, this is just a snapshot, but it very much shows the breadth of support available right from bench to bedside, so you can see through invention right through to adoption. And I represent part of the infrastructure, as you can see there, shaded in the kind of pink color towards the bottom, the clinical research network. And that sits right between invention and adoption. So working with companies who are about at that clinical stage and looking to perhaps venture into clinical trials within patients across the NHS. And I mentioned this is all being possible through a strong government commitment financially. The NIHR receives around £1 billion per annum in which to execute the role that we play, with half of this money every year being invested in this infrastructure, represented by some of these graphics, and a further 500 million every year being invested into about 10 different funding programs, which actually makes the NIHR the largest funder of research in the United Kingdom. So I'm going to specifically talk about the clinical research network and specifically the offering that we provide to the life sciences industry. And before I jump into that, I just want to cover the composition, because we very much are a network in design and not just name. So we're comprised of 15 local networks across England. We have a coordinating centre with several national offices. So we're really pulling on those local expertise and pulling them through as a network. And we work very closely with our colleagues in the devolved nations of Scotland, Northern Ireland and Wales. So it very much is a UK contribution to the offerings we provide to the life sciences industry. And because we're government funded, it means that we can provide a series of services to the life sciences industry. And that's inclusive of all types of companies, not just sponsors, but CROs as well. And the sponsors, it includes pharmaceutical companies, biotech companies, medtech, digital companies, spin-outs, SMEs, startups. Every type of company who is looking to generate data from clinical research, we will happily support. And as I say, we provide these services, with the exception of one, completely free of charge. And these are all aimed around 3 specific areas: planning, placing, and performing. So I'm just going to address a couple of those areas. And the first one we look at is plan. So we will help you from an early stage to plan your clinical trial in the UK, whether or not that's looking at clinical input into trial design, so having clinicians review your draft protocol. We're very pleased to have launched a couple of years ago a patient-centric service where we facilitate a patient advocacy group relevant to the disease area of your project to meet, to review documents, to have input into the trial design. We're very keen to make sure that patients are part of the planning process and protocols are written with patients and not for them. We also provide GCP training, which is accredited by Transcelerate, and this is available to anyone wanting to undertake this. And a big part about what we're doing, and I'll talk a little bit about this later, is the importance of being inclusive, diverse, and equitable with your research. So at this early stage, we want to get involved, looking at your protocols and making sure that they are as inclusive to all populations as possible. So essentially, and the patient engagement and clinical development service I kind of alluded to is the only service in which there is a small charge, because there are costs incurred, such as supporting patients for their time. But apart from that, everything that we do to facilitate these services is free of charge, very much around supporting the planning at that protocol stage. As we move on to placing, it's probably quite obvious, but this is a UK-wide approach to ensuring that you're selecting the best sites for your project. What we offer is a couple of different services. Site identification, which is obvious what that does, but we disseminate study information that you present to us to all of our 15 local regions and our colleagues in Northern Ireland, Scotland and Wales. What they then do is get in touch with all NHS institutions that might be interested in taking part in that project. And that is inclusive of all care settings, not just secondary care. You're looking at over 1,200 NHS hospitals and countless times that in terms of general practices. So we will scour the entire UK within 2 to 3 weeks and get interested research centres to complete feasibility, which we will return to you at absolutely no cost. And obviously, if you're already working with sites, that's absolutely fine. We don't tell you which sites to select. So if you have already been working with sites, that's absolutely fine. We have something called site intelligence, which is very much a top level overview of supporting capability for that site. And a lot of companies come to us for a combination of services, often site intelligence and site identification. And we're also very keen to ensure that you are getting those sites up and running as quickly as possible. So we provide costing tools, model clinical trial agreements for you to use, and then our local teams will work with those sites and work with you as the company or the CRO, if you've appointed one, to get those centres up and running as quickly as possible. Moving on to performance, this is a key part about what we're doing. We're very much invested in making sure that you get the participants recruited onto the trial in a timely fashion based on your milestones. So we will work with you to set up development plans and delivery plans, working across the network, working with our sites, working with you to ensure that those centres are set up quickly and to ensure they recruit on time and target. And we track data on a live basis to make sure that at a granular level, we can identify issues going on at sites or across the study, and we will look to intervene if things fall behind schedule. So addressing what those issues, those barriers to recruitment might be, whether or not it's something intrinsic to the protocol, and we can ask our clinical expertise to provide solutions, whether or not that's protocol amendments, things like that, or it could be there's a capacity issue and we can look at working with R&D at those centres to see if there's something we can do about reallocation of resources. So very much the services we provide to the life science industry are everything from connecting you to KOLs and having them look at protocols, to having patient input into protocols, looking at the equality, diversity and inclusion piece through site feasibility, getting those sites set up as quickly as possible, and then the performance management of the trial as well. And just to give you an idea about the scope and scale of the organisation, there's some metrics here from the last financial year. And you can see that there was almost 1.4 million participants that took part in research that we supported in 2020-21. Just over 35,000 of those were into commercial contract research. And when you look at the kind of cumulative total over the last 5 years, you're almost looking at 5 million participants that we have supported onto clinical trials. And we're seeing around 700 to 900 new commercial trials come onto our portfolio every year. And I think out of all those statistics, the most staggering is the fact that we see 100% of NHS trusts research active in some form or other, with 50% of GP practices across the UK research active. So we are very much a conduit into the entirety of the NHS across the UK. I just wanted to finish up by talking about something which is a huge priority to the country, to the UK, to the National Institute of Health Research, and a big passion of mine. And that's all around improving healthcare through more inclusive research. We launched a project in 2018 called Include. And what we really want to do is, and have done, is provided guidance, frameworks and tools for researchers and companies to ensure that they are taking these EDI principles into consideration at that early stage to really make a difference and to make opportunities more inclusive across the UK, across all types of communities. And I've just kind of spelt out some of the areas in which we're working with companies to ensure they're doing this. And the first thing really is identifying, so to working with you to identify the different underserved communities across the country. It's then important to understand the barriers that are associated to those different underserved populations, and then to create really flexible, smart protocols which allow and prevent those barriers and actually provide solutions. A lot of this moving into a kind of remote trial methodology, decentralized trials, very patient-centric, very much future-proofing to have those flexible protocols to provide choice to those patients and remove barriers. It's then also really crucial that we're smart with site selection. So we're doing things like looking at prevalence data, looking at previous research activity data, looking at different demographic data from ethnicity to different social deprivation indices to make sure we're being inclusive in terms of the centres that you're conducting research at and the demographics of those patient populations that they sit within. A huge part is then trust. So it's how we translate that, and on the ground, how do we work with our local teams, our researchers, our patient advocates to really instill trust amongst those different communities. And a key part about this is being able to adapt. So it's to identify when things aren't working, to be able to amend protocols, to take on innovative and dynamic methodologies. And then to kind of finally conclude, it's all about learning. It's realizing what's working, realizing what doesn't work, and building an arsenal of tools and guidance that we can work with you to ensure that you are targeting and providing equal opportunities both to support your research in terms of retention and recruitment and those numbers, but very much from a moral and ethical obligatory point of view from us. So that was an absolute whistle-stop tour, but we've got some questions at the end. If you have anything you want to have me repeat or answer, I'd be happy to address that. But I'm now going to hand you over to Janet from the Health Research Authority. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Theo, and good morning, everyone. I'm Janet Messer. I'm Director of Approvals at the Health Research Authority. To some extent, I'm also presenting on behalf of a UK-wide cross-sector programme, which we're calling the Research Recovery, Resilience and Growth Programme. And that is encompassing a whole suite of activities that we're taking forward in the UK to make it a really great place to do research. And you've heard a little bit from Theo about some of that. But I want to describe one particular area in relation to the regulatory approvals for trials that we've initiated here in the UK and tell you a little bit more about that. Next slide, please, Theo. So just as a bit of background into the Health Research Authority and who we are, because there isn't any organisation quite like what we do in the States. So we're probably best known for providing research ethics committees, or IRBs as they're called in the States, to review the ethics of proposed research. But actually we have a number of services that review for various regulatory purposes, and we review and assess research. But we do more than that. We have a key role working across the system to standardise and streamline regulatory and practice activities across the UK, and with a real focus on enabling innovative patient-centred research. We're really driven to balance protecting and promoting the interests of patients and the public. So we safeguard their interests by making sure that research is ethical and done to high quality, but we also want to promote research because we know that research is good for patients and for the public. Next slide. So we obviously, by hosting IRBs or ethics committees, we provide that assessment and review of research. But we've added on a number of additional functions over the recent years. So we provide a single technical assurance of pharmacy and radiation aspects of research on behalf of the NHS. That means that there's a much reduced duplication of what might otherwise be done at every single health service provider across the UK. That can be done once, and then the staff in those NHS organisations can accept that assurance and get on with the business of delivering research. We also provide model contracts for sponsors and sites. So rather than having to negotiate the legalities of the contract, we have standard UK model contracts and an increasing suite of them to cover a whole range of different scenarios, both including medicines and devices investigations. Next slide. But to come specifically on to combined review. So historically in the UK, in order to conduct a clinical trial of an investigational medicinal product, you'd have had to apply separately to our competent authority, the NIHR, and also to get Research Ethics Committee review. What we have done is to bring those two things together into a managed system within IRAS, our Integrated Research Application System. And that provides for one application, one coordinated review with one set of questions, if there are any, and one combined decision at the end of that. And we've been developing that over a number of years with significant input from industry and academia. And that's going to be the standard way for reviewing clinical trials from January. So it's really important that industry globally understands what this change is and the benefits that it's bringing. So part of what we're doing in that is creating this UK ideal path. What we're trying to achieve is by providing digital support through IRAS, we're helping to make sure that the right information gets to the right place in terms of which review body, but also at the right time. So sequencing these activities sequencing the review of radiation so that it can provide information to sites at the right point in time, sequencing the provision of information to ethics committees and MHRA, and making sure that flow of information and that flow of support produces a really efficient and effective process for setting up studies. So we've identified now that compared with a baseline back in 2018 of how we used to do clinical trials, and now with our combined review process, that combined review process reduces the timeline for approval by 50%. So that's a really radical difference when you're comparing the end-to-end timelines. And some of that is just simple things like from moving from sequential activities to parallel activities, but doing that in a way that makes it really easy for companies to undertake their research and get their approvals in the UK. We're also expanding beyond that to look more broadly at how we make it easy to do good research. So on the next slide, we've just recently been publishing some guidance to help with decentralized trials. They come by all sorts of names: remote trials, decentralized trials, or even centralized trials. There are different terminologies that are being used, but this is basically where instead of there being patients going to just, the site, oops, sorry, we've brushed ahead there, Theo, can you just pop back? Thank you. That instead of patients going to one site, one hospital, and everything being done in the hospital, there's a mix of patients being seen locally by their general practice, or even being seen in the home, or providing data through remote data collection. And those barcodes there will take you to our guidance on that. And we've been working in this cross-sector partnership to do things like delivering that guidance and providing these combined review processes to make a real difference. And just a few of the other things that we've been working on the next slide, please, Theo. So the themes for this Recovery, Resilience and Growth programme are shown here. And the Health Research Authority is really focused on these three central areas: efficiency, patient-centred, and supported by data and digital tools, as I think you'll have seen already from some of the things I've described. Just a few more of those activities that are supporting that. So on the next slide, we're expanding our suite of model contracts. So there are contracts, for example, for hub and spoke models, so that patients can be referred from spokes of general practices into one central research site, for example. We're working with the National Institute for Health Research, Clinical Research Network, and with NHS England on a scheme that we're calling the National Contract Value Review, which is all about really simplifying and reducing the duplication and burden of agreeing financial aspects of contracts with NHS organisations. And we're exploring a pilot with the experimental cancer medicine centres for really radically different ways of setting up early phase cancer research in the NHS. On the next slide, picking up some of Theo's points about being patient-centred, we're developing guidance to improve diversity and inclusion in research, and we're looking to colleagues in other organisations to sign up with us to a joint commitment to public involvement, so that we really ensure that that's embedded in the ways that we work in the UK. And then finally, we're also in that programme doing some significant work on using digital platforms to support finding, recruiting and following up patients in clinical trials. And Claire will be talking about that a little bit later on. So in summary, on the next slide, what we're really looking to achieve in the UK is fast, adaptive, enabling regulation. And we will be revising our regulations in the UK in coming months to really support that flexible, proportionate way of working, but that also really works well for those who are undertaking global trials and works well wherever you are globally, that the UK can play a really active part in that research. So my final slide with my details, should you wish to follow up with me. But thank you very much indeed. And I'm really delighted now to hand over to my colleague, Dr. Jacoline Bouvy from NICE. Thank you.
Thanks so much, Janet. So good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I am the Technical Director for NICE Scientific Advice, and I'll say a couple of things about the services that we offer to life sciences companies. And if you're considering conducting trials to facilitate market access of a product in the NHS, why you might want to consider coming for scientific advice. Next slide, please. So for those of you that's familiar with NICE, we're the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence. We have been around for a little over 2 decades. We were originally set up in the late 1990s as a special health authority with a remit to make national recommendations for the use of drugs within the National Health Service. So as the NHS is a tax-funded healthcare system where patients have free access to treatments, it was decided that at the national level, NICE would be making a recommendation about what treatments should and should not be made available on the NHS. Over the years, we have taken on a number of other remits as well, and we have gone some name changes, but we've always stuck with our original acronym. Next slide, please. So NICE's role within the health system is in England is to improve outcomes for people using the NHS and other public health and social care services. And we do that in a number of ways. We do that by producing evidence-based guidance and advice for public health and social care practitioners. We also develop quality standards and provide a range of information services. People will be most familiar with our clinical guidelines that we produce for the NHS, but we also make recommendations on the adoption of new technologies, including drugs, as well as devices, diagnostic and digital health technologies. Next slide, please. So if you are developing a technology that might at some point go through a NICE evaluation, so that could be a medical technology such as device, diagnostic or digital health technology, or pharmaceutical, you might want to consider coming for scientific advice. What we can do is provide you with advice on your clinical and economic development plans. So we tend to advise life sciences companies ahead of their pivotal phase 3 studies about to what extent their study design and the evidence that they are anticipating to generate meets the value framework and the evidence standards that NICE tends to use in its evaluations. Ultimately, that is a key part within England for market access of technologies. So what we hope to do by providing that service is to help life sciences companies and developers of medtech to understand how to meet the requirements for a NICE evaluation. And we do that in the following way. Next slide, please. So we have a fabulous technical team who work on these projects, but we always involve external experts in our projects as well. So we always involve clinicians who practice in the NHS who will be providing kind of key input on the treatment pathway for a certain condition within the NHS, but also about what that treatment pathway looks like and what relevant treatments and comparators for your product might be. So that is really key in understanding what your relevant comparators might be, but also where you're positioning your technology within the NHS. We involve experts in health technology assessment, health economists, and in all our projects we involve patient experts as well. There are a range of questions and issues that companies bring to us that we can advise on. Key questions tend to be focusing on to what extent the study population, as it will be defined by the clinical trial, will be representative of patients the NHS, whether there might be any clinically relevant subgroups that need consideration and that NICE might be interested in seeing as part of an appraisal. But we also can advise on the relevance and what the likely relevant comparators for your technology might be, acceptability of endpoints used in your clinical trial, and a range of other issues we can provide input on. Next slide, please. So we can provide advice on a range of different types of technologies and methodological considerations that you might have. There are a couple of things that we cannot do. So although you can come to us with a proposed trial design or a proposed economic model or approach to economic analysis, we cannot design these things from scratch for you. So that is beyond our remit. We also do not have a remit to discuss commercial considerations for your product, although NICE does have an office for managed access that can facilitate those types of commercial discussions with payers in the UK. Our advice is non-binding. So although we can provide input on your proposals, we do not offer a formal endorsement of your proposals. Next slide, please. So why might you consider seeking advice from NICE before you are finalizing your evidence generation plans? Ultimately, we hope that providing the service to life sciences companies and developers helps de-risking your strategy for market access in the UK. Ultimately, what we hope to do is provide you with input on what NICE's evidence standards are, what evidence package you will need to come to NICE with to facilitate more smooth market access, and under what types of circumstances NICE might be able to provide a positive recommendation for your technology, and also to identify under what circumstances you might struggle a lot more with that. Next slide, please. So we offer a range of services, and I'll talk about a couple of them in more detail. So our standard scientific advice is what we predominantly use for companies who are developing drugs that might go through a NICE technology appraisal, but we offer a range of other services for more focused on medtech developers as well, which I'll say a bit more about in a minute. So we offer parallel advice with the UK regulator, with the NIHR, with a Canadian HTA body called CADIS, and we also offer the option to build our advice project around European regulatory advice as well. And we have a service called PRIMA as well, which is a preliminary assessment of an economic model. So what we can do there is we can do a thorough quality assurance of your economic model that you might be preparing as part of preparing for a NICE submission. It's important to note that we work on a cost recovery basis, so all of our projects will be fee-based. There's more information on our website about what typical costs are for different services. Of course, we treat all information as confidential, which also means that we do not share the advice with the teams that will perform a technology appraisal or do the NICE evaluation of your product. So we have separate teams that work on those different processes, and our advice is non-binding, which means that you're free to follow or ignore the advice that we provide you, although we of course provide it with the intention of helping you increase your more smooth market access in the NHS. That also means that our advice is non-binding, so it is not a guarantee to market access, because there always will be considerations outside of the remit of what we can advise on that might impact decision making. Next slide, please. So our standard project will start with a submission of your briefing book, which is essentially a summary of your clinical development plans, your technology, and optionally also your economic analysis plans. And then based on that, we might ask you some clarification questions. But then a key moment happens at week 10. Next slide, please. So at week 10, we will have a meeting you will have a meeting with the NICE team as well as our panel of experts, which used to be a face-to-face in our offices. Since the start of the pandemic, we've been doing this virtually over Zoom, which actually works really well. So this now is our preferred option for these meetings. It is an option to come to our offices, but we prefer to have them over Zoom, and it actually works quite well with global companies who might want people in different regions to attend these meetings. And then at week 18, after submitting your briefing book, we send you a formal advice report, which contains our advice and answers to questions that you can ask us. So this is roughly the outline of our standard advice project. Next slide, please. And then finally, we also have a couple of other services that are more tailored to medtech developers. So the Meta tool is for those companies and those technologies that sit earlier in the evidence generation life cycle. So you might not have a fully fledged study protocol at this point, but if you have a medical technology and you're interested in understanding what your product's value proposition to the NHS might be and what evidence gap you might have to support and substantiate that value proposition, that is something where we have a specific service that can help you identify those gaps. And we offer tailored medtech advice as well, identifying kind of key issues and what plans you might have for generating evidence in support of your product's value proposition. And we also offer standard advice services for medtech developers as well. Next slide, please. And then finally, we have a couple of recent developments, and in the interest of time, I'll just focus on ILAP. So this is the Innovative Licensing and Access Pathway, in which NICE is one of the system partners that, together with the MHRA and other UK partners, it provides support and a number of tools to help companies in their journey to from clinical development to market access in the UK. If you are a life sciences company and you have not heard of ILAP before, please do have a look at this on the MHRA website. And then finally, we are working together with a number of other organizations, setting up a multi-agency advice service for AI and data-driven technologies, recognizing the increasing importance and of these types of technologies for the NHS and for patients. And then finally, next slide, please. That is everything I wanted to cover. I have listed here all the ways in which you can get in touch with us to inquire more about our services. And I'm now going to hand over to Claire Bloomfield from NHSX. Thank you.
Thanks, Jacqueline. And I'm fortunate coming third because both of the previous speakers have nicely laid out where NHSX sits within some of this landscape. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Find, Recruit and Follow-up programme, but just to give you an intro to who I am and the world in which I sit. Next slide, please. And we'll skip on to the next one. I'm based within NHSX within the Centre for Improving Data Collaboration, which is a relatively new entity to support and foster widespread data-driven innovation and better partnerships between industry and the NHS system to support a smarter digital investment and to ensure that we're harnessing the most value back into the NHS for patients and the public. As I said, we were established only in 2020, and within that team, we've been growing quite significantly and will continue to over the next few years, and have 4 guiding functions. So we support decision-making and offering practical advice and capability building and know-how within the NHS to ensure we can be a good innovation partner. We're shaping the ecosystem through strategy and policy development work, including the work around trusted research environments, and as well as focusing on driving smarter digital investments, so shaping what good looks like, and who pays for what in terms of how and who investments are made into the system. And then finally, my portfolio sits around accelerating data-driven R&D, where we're investing in the NHS data infrastructure and support services to enable more research and innovation in a more efficient, faster, effective way to ensure that we harness the capabilities and the learnings from the pandemic. So within that, so that's where we sit. Next slide, please. We've had laid out from Theo some of the critical role that clinical research plays within improving healthcare to prevent, diagnose and treat conditions. And what we're aiming to do is take some of the key learnings from the pandemic to really ensure that we keep some of the speed and efficiency we learned from across the ecosystem, and to bring the different parts of the sector together collaboratively and effectively to ensure that we can deliver more impact. As we're starting to come out of the pandemic, I don't think we're quite out, but the endemic situation we continue to find ourselves in, how we take some of those learnings and the nimble adaptive approaches we've taken to research and innovation and collaboration across the system, and can scale and deploy those across cancer, cardiovascular medicine, mental health, obesity, and a range of other conditions. Next slide, please. Theo, I think again, has referenced the life sciences vision, the NHS long-term plan, and the DHSC vision for the future of UK clinical research. And Janet also referenced the Recovery, Resilience and Growth Programme. That's the framework within which I'm going to talk to you about Find, Recruit and Follow Up, which was seeded in this year and taking some of the learnings from studies like the Recovery Programme and the work around dexamethasone, and expanding that to make it easier for trialists to navigate and engage through the system. Next slide, please. So this year, we've been really looking from our broad goal to potentiate the UK's unique health data offer to become a world-leading destination as an attractive place for cutting-edge life sciences R&D. And two of the investments within this year, which we've seeded and will be continuing over the next 3 years, are to support the faster, effective and innovative development of clinical trials, which are as a data-driven service, which is the Find, Recruit and Follow-Up service offering. But I also wanted to flag some more of our investments into both national and subnational trusted research environments as a means of ensuring we're providing access and linkage of health data, but in a secure and patient-enhancing trust way. So we're combining these two with the goal of ensuring that we can get a wider cohort of the UK population engaged with research and having the opportunity to be involved in clinical trials based off the great success of the vaccine register, that data users have an enhanced positive experience with regard to accessing the different data services that are offered across the UK, that we enhance the number of clinical trialists that are able to use the NHS Digital DigiTrials offering, which is with one of our national showcase investments, and that we make it easier for innovators and data users to interact with NHS Digital and other service offerings, so that there's a more coherent commercial process for innovators to engage with, which will realise and unlock more potential back into the NHS. Next slide, please. So in terms of Find, Recruit and Follow Up specifically, and Janet again alluded to this work, and the HRA are one of the critical components to the work we've been doing this year, is how we support literally the finding of the right patient cohorts, so the feasibility components of the clinical trial pipeline, the recruitment of patients, both identifying the relevant patients to be included in the study, and then communicating and engaging with those people to optimise the conversion from invitation to uptake and participation in studies, and then the follow-up offering within that. Next slide. And underpinning this, we want to support a navigation and enhanced ability for people to find their way through the system and join up through what can be, and we hear repeatedly, is a complex system to navigate in the UK as to who to go to and where. This year in our pilot, we've been working across NHS Digital, the Clinical Research Network through NIHR, and with Janet and the HRA. And we've been providing a coordinating role to really invest in specific offerings between these partners, but also enhancing the services they're providing and linking those through some enhanced data offerings. Janet's laid out a lot of the work of the HRA, so I won't particularly follow on and dig into that into too much detail, but to flag both the critical work in terms of the NIHR CRNs in providing feasibility and the self-service offerings that they're developing, as well as NHS Digital in automating and developing an enhanced sophistication of their feasibility and outcome services, as well as trialling specific components about novel ways of identifying and recruiting patients into study. And I'll give you a couple of case studies at the end of this slide set about what we've been achieving so far. Next slide, please. There's a lot of detail on this slide, so again, you'll have this afterwards, but in a snapshot, this is what FRF is aiming to support, which is from scanning for trial design and looking at eligibility criteria, all through the way through follow-up and to routine long-term monitoring, reporting and engaging with patients post an individual clinical trial, and how we can either invest in new data enabling solutions to support the bridging between these components, or by convening and supporting the ecosystem and generating a navigation tools to support different parts of the system collaborating more effectively. And we're hoping that what we'll do by investing in these components, next slide please, is that we can support some of the core ambitions of the clinical research delivery plan, so that we're ensuring that there are patient-centered trial designs, that we ensure that we end up with a optimized diversity and inclusivity in the types of patients and public involved and invited to be part of research, which will optimize the quality of the clinical trials delivered. That we're meeting trialists' needs in terms of both time and cost effectiveness, but ensuring that we can meet the needs of a diversity of different types of trial design, both decentralized remote studies as well as more conventional CTIMPs. That it's easier for trialists to know where to go and how to engage with the system, so you're not bouncing around various parts of the structure across the UK, so enhancing that experience and making it more confident that you can place your studies in the UK and they will deliver to time and to budget. And that we can, through those activities, we can enhance the ability for the public and patients to feel engaged in research as part of their care, that there's earlier access for them and the NHS as a whole to therapies, and that we can lead to more studies in the UK to not only benefit those patients, but to enhance the innovation in the NHS as a whole. Next slide, please. And to give two examples of this, I haven't referenced recovery in the dexamethasone study. That was one of the first studies that DigiTrials and NHS Digital were supporting. But another is the Orion 4 study, which was a collaboration between Oxford and NHS DigiTrials, which supported a multi-site 12,000 patient strong study in cardiovascular disease, which allowed inclusion and exclusion criteria to be rapidly developed at a national level to then ensure that the right patients were being invited to be part of the study. And this is converted through into inclisiran now being available within the NHS for specific patient populations as a cholesterol lowering intervention for relevant cohorts. Next slide, please. Also underway currently is the NHS Gallery trial, which is supported with GRAIL, which is an early intervention or early diagnostic tool, pre-malignant cancer status patients, where again, a large number, over 150,000 people were invited to be part of the study, where the inclusion-exclusion criteria involved not having had a cancer diagnosis in the last 3 years and being over 50 years of age. Trying to identify that cohort at a national level calls on national data sets, and NHS Digital and DigiTrials were able to identify an appropriate cohort to invite, and have had now an over 12% conversion rate into that study, which is more than doubled the forecasted uptake rate within the study. So those are just two early examples of the way we're aiming to support data and digital enabled studies, which rely on combination and collaboration between HRA, between the clinical research networks for trial delivery, and the oversight of national data sets are possible through the NHS infrastructure. That's just one of the investments we're making through the Centre for Improving Data Collaboration and the Data for R&D programme, and I'd be happy to take any follow-up questions around the broader portfolio of work we're engaged in. Thank you.
Hi everyone. So I'm Peter Jelfs. I'm the head of tax at the Department for International Trade in the Investment Directorate. I'm just going to give you a very quick overview today on some of the financial and tax incentives that are available to companies that want to come to the UK and undertake qualifying R&D. Could we have the next slide, please? Thank you. So just a very general overview then of the UK's tax system. The UK government has historically seen it as very important to have a competitive tax environment in the UK compared to our competitor countries. Obviously, R&D is very mobile, and so if a company is planning to undertake R&D activities, then we're in direct competition with a lot of other countries. So in the UK, we've historically had a low rate of corporation tax. It's currently the lowest in the G20, and it will shows every sign of remaining that way. We have a stable tax regime, so businesses can always do with certainty. Uncertainty is a bit of a killer for investment, so that's recognised as very important by the UK government and the relevant departments that deal with tax policy. We have competitive R&D tax incentives, so I'll talk a little bit more about those in a minute. We also have capital allowances, so these allow for tax relief against investment into plant and machinery, and again I'll mention those briefly. We also have incentive schemes for investors, so people who want to invest in the equity of startup and R&D intensive companies, in a variety of schemes, so that's for individuals or venture capital firms. Next slide, please. So this just gives a little overview, this slide, of the two main tax incentives in the UK that encourage R&D. I won't go into them in too much detail. You can obviously take the slides away and read them as you wish, but we have two main schemes. The first is the R&D tax credit system, which has been well established in the UK for over 20 years now. We have two different schemes under that. We have a scheme for SMEs specifically, although in this context an SME is actually a pretty large company. As long as you employ fewer than 500 employees globally, then you count as an SME. And if you qualify for this scheme, then you can get effectively up to 33% of your qualifying R&D funded by the UK government in the form of reduction in your taxable profits, or if you are pre-revenue, then it will come as a cash credit. So very generous and very well, very important for a lot of SMEs undertaking R&D, and yeah, very much valued by them. Our largest scheme is called the RDEC scheme, and this provides for an above-the-line tax credit of 13% of qualifying expenditure. So effectively, government is subsidising, depends a bit upon your tax profile, but it's going to be subsidising between 10 and 13% of your R&D spend. And those are both relatively competitive compared internationally. The SME one certainly is well up there in terms of generosity. Complementing the R&D tax credits, we have a scheme called the Patent Box, and in overview, this allows a company that owns patents and derives profits from those patents to pay a very low rate of corporation tax of just 10% on those profits. So again, if you can, as a company, if you can get yourself into the position whereby you can have the profits in the right company and the patents in the right company, then this is a very attractive reason for IP-rich companies to come and set up in the UK and undertake qualifying R&D here. Next slide, please. So again, a lot of information here around capital allowances. That's the tax relief available for expenditure on plant and machinery. I'll let you take that away and read that as you want. I would just mention the super deduction, which is the fourth bullet point, which is a new tax relief introduced as a result of the pandemic to encourage businesses to invest in plant and machinery. This is available until 31st of March 2023, so it might be difficult to access it if you're not already in the UK, but effectively it allows for a 130% tax relief against any qualifying plant and machinery. So an exceptionally generous relief, and I mean, actually it's pretty much the most generous in the world at the moment. So if you are planning on buying any plant and machinery in the UK to assist in your R&D, then there's never been a better time to do so. Next slide, please. Right, I think we've finished the presentation, so I will hand back to Joseph, who will lead in the question section. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Peter, and thank you to all of the panelists for walking through some very, very helpful information. We will now turn over to Q&A. I see we have 3 questions in the Q&A boxes that I will go through. So I think the first 2 are most likely for Theo. So question 1, does the NIHR also provide support in SME and data analysis and statistics? Theo?
Thanks, Joseph. I'm not sure if I perfectly understand the question. Like I say, we do work with all types of companies, including SMEs, and we do provide data to all types of companies as well to support their kind of trial development, their feasibility. So whether this is looking at kind of site data in terms of prevalence in previous research activity, or looking at data to support the development of the protocols. I'm not sure if that answers the question.
Perhaps the individual who asked the question it needs a bit more clarity. You can add this within the chat. Oh, it does. It does. Perfect.
Perfect. Thank you.
Very, very good. I guess the next question then, Theo, any guidance from NIHR to attendees on engaging directly as trial sponsors versus via CRO or with CRO partners, especially relevant for global trials?
So again, similar response. We work with all types of companies. I mentioned we probably see around 700 to 900 commercial clinical trials every year that comes onto our portfolio that we support. Around 2/3 of those are managed by CROs. So we actually do work with CROs in the majority. So to be honest, we do provide, I suppose, feasibility services that might be similar to offerings from CROs, but we distinguish ourselves and distance ourselves in terms of some of the areas that CROs provide and we don't. So for example, we're not the body that would support with regulatory submissions. We don't use CRAs in terms of clinical site monitoring. So we wouldn't replace the need for a CRO, but we do work in kind of collaboration with the CRO and the sponsor, and that entirely depends on your business model that you want to employ. We can get involved before you outsource to a CRO or afterwards. Again, that depends on your preference. So we can work with you directly as a sponsor, or we can work with you through a CRO as well. That's up to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Theo. I believe the next question is likely for Doctors Bouvy and Messer. What are NICE's thoughts on real-world data and real-world evidence? Are NICE and the HRA going to work together, providing more guidance on the use of RWD for regulatory approvals and tech assessments? Real-world data, I believe it's RWD.
Thanks. Shall I go first, Janet?
Yeah,
and then
sure.
hand over to you. So it's an excellent question. So NICE is currently we're in the process of updating our methods guide and recognize that there is a role for real world data and real world evidence as part of our assessments. Although especially for establishing clinical effectiveness, RCTs still are the preferred study design for that. We recognize that randomized studies not always feasible or possible to run, and we're actually working on a framework for using real world evidence, which is aiming to provide more detailed guidance on the use of real world data and real world evidence as part of our assessments. We hope to publish a draft version of that early next year. So for those of you interested in that, do keep an eye out on our website for that. So just to say, we are interested and we are actively working. So our data and analytics program is actively working on providing more guidance on making better use of real world evidence.
Thanks, Jacoline. I recognise there's probably a number of elements to this question. So one, as Jacqueline's covered, is using such data for getting NICE recommendations. But there are several steps before that. So there's whether that real world data can be used for licensing purposes. And I know from our conversations with the MHRA that they are indeed looking at those sorts of areas around where that's appropriate, and what the what the regulatory requirements around the use of real world data might be. And then of course there are the information governance or data protection aspects of how you might access such real world data and actually undertake the research. And again, that's something that we're working very much with other parties to explore. Some of that comes into the find, recruit and follow-up work, because follow-up data indeed can form a really important part of use of real world data. So Claire might want to come in on some of that, but there are indeed, we've got good experience of using real world data in the UK. And we have, for example, MHRA host the Clinical Practice Research Data Link, which has got some really excellent experience of using real world data in trials. So I think it's something that we've got a really good offer on how you can go about that, and we're really joining that across the system, as Jacqueline's explained all the way through to NICE as well. Claire, did you want to pick up anything on that as well?
Yeah, thank you, Janet. I think there's two things I think I'd flag is we will be investing in real world data trusted research environments at a sub-national level across England to address the availability of some of these data sets, which are not available at a national level in the granularity and the multimodal nature that's required, particularly for AI and some of the tech solutions that are needed to be developed. So we're seeing that those will provide some of the environments for doing the trials and the testing and development, and then it's the work of across the system with NICE and MHRA and HRA to ensure that's done in a transparent, safe way, and also one that will meet regulatory requirements. So it's an area of expansion in the UK.
Excellent. Thanks to everyone. And I've actually been emailed a question. This question is for Peter. Specifically, beyond the tax incentives that you've just outlined, are there any other additional finance for ex-UK companies looking to conduct clinical research within the UK?
I mean, those are the main ones, Joseph, that we've covered off. I mean, obviously there are a wide range of taxes that have to be considered. So I didn't touch on, for example, the social security aspects or the income tax rates for employees in the UK. So taxes is just part of the bigger picture, and we don't just want to focus on corporation tax or even just the tax incentives. One has to consider it in the round, but I think we've covered the key presentation there. I mean, if there are specific questions on a particular tax, I'm happy to take those offline and respond to them.
Very good. I believe if there are more questions, please feel free to put them in the chat, or if you're feeling courageous, feel free just to raise your hand and ask directly. We have a few shy participants, but I've been getting another email. This question is likely for you, Theo. Specifically, it asks, are there therapeutic area specific resources that the NIHR offers to companies who are looking to conduct clinical trials within the UK, specifically within, for example, within the CNS space? Would there be a CNS specific resource that could be deployed to help a particular company?
So I suppose from a CRM perspective, we don't have a kind of preference or proclivity to any therapeutic area. We will work with the NHS very much as a conduit to assess whether there is an appetite, capacity, capability to deliver all types of trials, diagnostic device, therapeutic, digital, whatever, across, every single disease area you could think of. There obviously is direction from a government perspective in terms of priorities. This does go back in terms of CNS a number of years ago in terms of mental health initiatives. This usually transcends in the area of, when I mentioned the funding programs provided by the NIHR as a collective, there often is response to government direction therapeutically, within the funding programs. So, for example, there was a mental health call for funding a number of years ago, and obviously around 24 months ago, there was a NIHR and UKRI collective pot of about £20 million for COVID research. So there is in that sense, but in terms of the work that we do at the CRN, we will support all disease areas, and we're fully embedded across the NHS to deliver on all those, including the multiple diseases that sit within CNS.
I would just add, though, and perhaps Theo is being slightly modest, that there is absolutely real expertise in a whole range of therapy areas. So it's not that it's generic, it's actually there is real expertise across a whole range of therapeutic areas. And so depending on what companies need, whether they need advice in sort of designing a trial well to work in the UK, taking account of, for example, standard care in the UK, or indeed to get public input, patient input into the design of trials for the UK, CRN can absolutely support that using real therapy knowledge in different areas.
Excellent. Thanks to both of you for your very helpful answers. I am issuing a final call for any additional questions that participants may have, please. If not, I'd like to again thank all of the panelists who joined us today. This was a very helpful webinar, and your insight is greatly appreciated. I'd like to also thank the participants who also joined as well. Hopefully you found the information helpful. The slide deck in this webinar will be made available. And if you have any additional questions, feel free to reach out per the instructions within the deck to the respective individuals who've been kind enough to join us today. So if there is nothing else, I wish everyone a very pleasant continuation of your days. For those across the pond in the UK, please enjoy your evenings. For those of us here in the States, please enjoy the rest of your days.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.